As Dylan set his wrench down for what felt like the 1000th time that week, he allowed himself a moment to stretch his tired arms and gaze into the neon-lit sky of the trade station he called home. He had been fixing, patching, and upgrading the station's inner workings for the last 3 years. It was an honest life and one that paid just enough to cover his rent, his meals, and his slightly embarrassing addiction to vintage intergalactic dramas. The occasional holographic show or video was his only respite from the never-ending repairs and maintenance that defined his days. Tonight, he'd planned to watch an odd piece he'd stumbled across called "I Came Inside My Alien Roommate from Behind," an absurd title, but strangely captivating. But before he could even clean his tools, a buzzing holographic message flickered to life on his console. The message was brief, its tone severe and strangely formal, a request, or perhaps a summons, to an estate he had never heard of, Alden Manor. Apparently, it was situated on one of the secluded moons beyond the usual trade routes. The message was unsigned, cloaked in the same aura of mystery as the title of his latest show choice. Dylan almost ignored it. After all, he had no reason to leave his stable job, and who would summon a repairman to some distant, forgotten estate? But something compelled him to look further. The message mentioned his full name, Dylan Alden. A name that had always felt as mundane and unremarkable as his job. Yet the very name of the manor matched his own, hinting at a connection he couldn't explain. Curiosity gnawed at him, tugging him towards the mysterious origin of the summons. With a sense of adventure he hadn't felt in years, Dylan boarded a small cargo shuttle, using his week's earnings to book passage to the remote moon. As the shuttle approached the secluded rock, Alden Manor came into view, a massive, looming structure veiled in fog, built atop a cliff that overlooked a shimmering, cerulean sea. It looked like something out of a dark fantasy, with spires and turrets that cut against the sky in jagged silhouettes. Dylan disembarked, his boots echoing against the ancient stone of the manor's grand entrance. His instincts told him this wasn't just any old building. A sense of recognition pulsed within him, as if he'd stepped into a dream that had lingered at the edge of his consciousness all his life. The intricate carvings along the walls, the strange symbols etched into the doorways, all of it resonated with a familiarity he couldn't place. Inside, the silence was thick, only broken by the distant sound of his footsteps. He took in the decor, tapestries hung in delicate folds, depicting battles and cosmic vistas that stretched across galaxies, interwoven with metallic threads that glinted under soft, otherworldly light. Portraits lined the hallways, each face gazing out with eyes that felt alive, almost too vivid. He paused at one, a tall figure with eyes that seemed to pierce through the centuries, a faint resemblance to his own etched in their features. Dylan Alden, a voice echoed from the shadows. He turned sharply, meeting the gaze of a woman with dark, intense eyes and a regal bearing. She was dressed simply, yet her presence was undeniably commanding, her voice carrying a weight of authority he didn't dare challenge. "Yes, I'm Dylan," he stammered. The woman inclined her head slightly. "I am Elena, the custodian of Alden Manor and protector of its secrets." She studied him, a flicker of something between admiration and sadness passing over her face. "You may not know it yet, but you are the heir of the Alden dynasty." Dylan blinked, incredulous. "Heir? I'm just a repairman. I came because of a message that seemed to know my name, not because I didn't know." He trailed off, his words swallowed by the enormity of what she was suggesting. Elena held up a hand to silence his protests, her eyes softening just a fraction. "Your family was entrusted with an ancient power, a duty passed down through the ages to protect the galaxy from forces beyond comprehension. The shadows, an ancient threat that seeks to twist the very fabric of existence, have begun to stir. And you, as the last living heir, are the only one who can harness the Alden power." The words left him reeling. He had always been a nobody, a background figure in the vast workings of the galaxy. To hear himself described as someone who held the fate of worlds in his hands was almost laughable. Yet, as Elena spoke, a strange warmth pulsed from within him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Was it recognition? Without a word, she gestured for him to follow. They walked through winding corridors and steep staircases until they arrived at a vast, circular chamber. At its center lay an orb, glowing faintly with swirling colors that danced like galaxies contained within glass. It was mesmerizing, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. This, Elena whispered, her voice reverent, is the heart of Alden. Only one of true Alden blood can wield its power, and even then, only if they're prepared to carry the responsibility. Her eyes met his, heavy with a knowledge he couldn't grasp. If you choose to, Dylan, you will inherit not just this manor, but the power and purpose it guards. Dylan approached the orb, his heart hammering in his chest. As he reached out a hand, the orb flared, illuminating the room with a vibrant, almost sentient light. He felt a surge of energy coursing through him, both electrifying and deeply unsettling, as if centuries of his ancestors' lives and memories passed through him in an instant. His hand hovered over the orb, feeling its pulsing warmth just beneath his fingertips. In that moment, images flooded his mind, visions of star systems alight with cosmic fires, of battles waged in the depths of space, of voices whispering in a language he'd never learned yet somehow understood. He saw himself wielding power, standing as a shield between life and oblivion, his every choice a ripple across galaxies. And then he saw Elena, standing beside him, fierce and steadfast, her presence both reassuring and enigmatic. When the vision faded, he found himself breathing heavily, the weight of what he had seen pressing down on him. He looked at Elena, his confusion giving way to a tentative resolve. "Why me?" he managed, his voice barely a whisper. Elena's gaze softened. "Because, Dylan, this is who you were meant to be. All the repairs, the skills you honed, they prepared you, in their own way, for this. You have a rare gift, an unbreakable spirit that doesn't back down, that seeks solutions even in the darkest of times. It's time to embrace who you truly are." She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was grounding, a steadying presence that anchored him to the here and now. As her fingers lingered, he felt a spark of something, an emotion that lay somewhere between admiration and a yearning he couldn't yet name. "Dylan," she continued, her voice soft yet unwavering, "this isn't just a duty, it's your destiny." With that, he knew there was no turning back. The pull of Alden Manor, the whisper of his bloodline's legacy, and the quiet strength he found in Elena's gaze all combined to fill him with a newfound purpose. Dylan's heart still thundered from the visions that had seared through him in the heart of Alden Manor. His hands felt restless, charged with an energy he couldn't quite control. Everything about the manor, the symbols, the ancient tapestry of Alden's legacy, even the orb itself felt like an illusion, and yet undeniably real. As he processed his new inheritance, he became aware of one other presence that had lingered at his side since he'd arrived. Elena. She stood across the chamber, her silhouette sharp and still in the ambient glow of the orb's fading light. Shadows played across her face, lending her an enigmatic aura, a quiet intensity that had drawn him in the moment they'd met. She watched him with a silent, contemplative gaze that seemed to measure not just his actions but his very soul. And the way she carried herself, as if bound to something far greater than herself, left an indelible impression on him. He felt compelled to break the silence, to dispel the tension that simmered between them. "You said you're the custodian of Alden Manor," he ventured, his voice hushed yet steady. "How long have you been here?" Her expression softened, just a touch, and she inclined her head. "Long enough that time has little meaning to me now. Alden Manor and I are." Connected, her words were carefully chosen, hinting at depths she did not yet trust him to understand. Her dark eyes gleamed, revealing fleeting glimpses of secrets she guarded closely. Dylan tilted his head, trying to make sense of her guarded response. "Connected? In what way?" Elena took a step forward, her hands clasped behind her back. She walked with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, her movements fluid yet purposeful. She was no ordinary guardian, that much was certain. "A long time ago, my family swore loyalty to the Alden dynasty," she explained. "My ancestors were bound by a pact to protect Alden Manor, its secrets, and its heir." Her gaze lingered on him, as if she were studying him with new eyes. "When the last of the Alden line vanished, I became the custodian of this place. I am the last of my line as well, charged with a duty that no one else can fulfill." Her voice carried an undercurrent of loneliness, a quiet resignation to a purpose that had consumed her life. Dylan felt a pang of sympathy, sensing the weight of her words. "So you've been waiting?" "For me?" he asked softly, realizing what that implied. She nodded, her face a study in stoic calm, though he thought he glimpsed something deeper, a trace of vulnerability hidden beneath her strength. Yes, Dylan. You are the last Alden. I have been waiting for you to return, to take up the mantle that is rightfully yours. Only you can awaken the full power of the Alden legacy. He tried to picture her life here, alone in the sprawling, isolated manor, bound by duty to an ancient family she barely knew. The thought unsettled him, filling him with a strange mix of admiration and sorrow for the woman standing before him. Why did you stay, he asked, the words slipping out before he could stop himself. Why dedicate your life to guarding a family that hasn't been here for centuries? A faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, a gesture both wistful and resigned. Because that is what I was born to do. To be the custodian, to keep Alden Manor alive until its true heir returned. My family's oath is as old as the manor itself, and I am the last one who remembers what it means. Dylan struggled to understand a devotion so profound, so unyielding. He'd never met anyone like her, someone so wholly committed to a purpose, with no personal gain or glory to be had. And the more he listened, the more he found himself drawn to her. What about your life, he asked gently. Haven't you ever wanted something for yourself? She hesitated, the question seeming to catch her off guard. Her gaze flickered away for a brief moment, as if she were grappling with an answer she wasn't sure she wanted to give. Elena, he pressed, his tone as soft as it was sincere. Surely there must have been someone, something. When she looked back at him, her dark eyes were calm but filled with something he couldn't quite decipher, regret, perhaps, or a deeply buried longing. It is my fate to serve, she said quietly. I was raised with the knowledge that my life belongs to Alden Manor, to the Alden heir. Any dreams I might have had, they are secondary. The words stirred something deep within Dylan, a quiet anger at the self-sacrifice that had defined her existence, and an undeniable sense of admiration for her unwavering loyalty. He was silent for a moment, his gaze resting on her with an intensity that even he hadn't anticipated. She was a mystery he felt compelled to unravel, her presence a strange yet comforting balm to the uncertainty he felt about his own role. So you know everything about this place, he said. A gentle shift in topic meant to ease the tension between them. Everything about my family. Yes, she replied, her tone softening. I have studied every record, every memory of the Aldens. I know your lineage, your heritage. And, if I may, she hesitated, her gaze flickering over his face as though searching for something. If you may, he prompted. Intrigued. I believe you have the potential to be one of the greatest Aldens, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The power within you, Dylan, it's stronger than that of those who came before. I can feel it. The manor can feel it. The sincerity in her words touched him deeply, a reassurance that he didn't realize he had needed. Despite his doubts, his fears, she saw something in him worth believing in. And in that moment, he felt an unexpected gratitude towards her, a strange, growing warmth that seemed to expand the more he looked at her. Thank you, Elena, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, she replied softly. Your actions will speak for you. Her hand, as if by instinct, reached out and rested lightly on his arm. The touch was brief, fleeting, yet it left a spark in its wake, a warmth that lingered long after her hand had fallen back to her side. Their eyes met, and for a moment the silence between them felt charged with an unspoken understanding. It was as if she had somehow seen into the depths of his soul, uncovering truths he hadn't yet grasped himself. And in that connection he found a quiet solace, a sense of belonging that had been absent from his life for as long as he could remember. The silence stretched, both comforting and oddly tense, until Elena broke it, her voice barely above a murmur. The shadows are stirring again, Dylan. They sense your return. That's why they become more active. The shadows, he echoed, remembering the brief mention of the ancient threat she had told him about before. What are they, exactly? Elena's gaze turned somber, her voice taking on a weighty, almost reverent tone. The shadows are remnants of a dark force that existed before time was measured, before the Aldens took up the mantle of guardianship. They are powerful, cunning, and relentless. Their purpose is to consume, to devour light and bend reality to their will. Dylan felt a chill creep along his spine, his newfound power suddenly seeming both a blessing and a curse. "And it's up to us to stop them," he asked, the enormity of the responsibility pressing down on him. "Yes," she replied, her tone firm yet gentle. "But you will not face this alone. I am here with you, Dylan. As long as I breathe, I will stand by your side." Her words, spoken with such quiet conviction, filled him with an unexpected courage. He didn't understand why, but something about her presence made the weight on his shoulders feel lighter. The path ahead was daunting, the responsibility enormous, but with Elena beside him, he felt ready to face it. He met her gaze, his own resolve hardening. "Then let's start. Show me what I need to do." Elena nodded, a faint, approving smile gracing her lips. Without another word, she led him from the chamber and through the labyrinthine corridors of Alden Manor. As they walked, she explained the rituals and practices of the Alden Guardians, the ancient ways of harnessing their powers, and the techniques that would strengthen him for the battles to come. In those quiet moments, he found himself not only learning about his legacy but about her as well. Beneath her stoic demeanor, he saw hints of warmth, a humor that flickered in her eyes when she recounted tales of Alden ancestors, and a loyalty so fierce it felt almost sacred. As days passed in training, Dylan's bond with Elena deepened. They trained tirelessly, their movements synchronized, their energies intertwined in a harmony he could barely describe. In her, he found not just a teacher or a guardian, but a confidante, a presence as steady as the heartbeat of Alden Manor itself. And as he looked at her, catching her gaze across the sparring room, or feeling her guiding hand at his shoulder, he knew one thing for certain: their fates were inextricably bound, woven together by the legacy they both carried and by a connection that felt as timeless as the stars. In that boundless silence between training sessions and whispered confessions of Alden lore, he found himself falling for the one person who had spent her life waiting for his return. And he knew that he would do anything to keep her by his side, to be the ally she deserved, and perhaps someday something more. In the dim glow of Alden Manor's inner sanctum, Dylan felt the ancient stones hum beneath his boots. They had begun to resonate the moment he entered, as if welcoming him into the fold of secrets that had been lying dormant for centuries. Elena walked beside him, her steps soundless yet purposeful, her gaze trained forward with a knowing intensity. She was leading him into the heart of the manor, the deepest chamber, hidden away from prying eyes for countless generations. It was here, she said, that he would finally confront his inheritance. They arrived at an arched doorway flanked by towering statues of long-gone Alden ancestors, each carved with expressions of fierce determination and solemn pride. Their eyes seemed to follow Dylan as he passed, a silent judgment that he couldn't shake off. Elena stopped at the entrance, turning to him with a look of quiet intensity. "Are you prepared for this, Dylan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the stillness of the room. Dylan swallowed, feeling the weight of his own uncertainty. He had seen glimpses of power before, visions and sensations that hinted at something profound locked within him. But now, standing here with Elena, on the verge of truly unlocking that potential, he felt the enormity of what lay ahead. Yet he trusted her completely. If Elena believed in him, maybe he could believe in himself too. "I'm ready," he said, meeting her gaze with a steadiness he hoped masked his apprehension. With a slight nod, Elena extended her hand toward a symbol carved into the wall, a spiral interwoven with intricate sigils. She placed her palm against it, and, as if in answer to her touch, the door shuddered, its ancient mechanisms whirring to life. The ground trembled faintly, and the door slid open, revealing a cavernous chamber beyond, filled with a soft, eerie glow. Dylan stepped forward, his breath catching at the sight before him. At the center of the chamber stood a vast crystal, pulsating with light that shifted between colors: indigo, gold, emerald, and crimson. The colors moved as though alive, swirling within the crystal's facets, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The air was thick with a strange electric energy, one that seemed to reach into his very bones, calling out to something deep within him. "This is the heart of Alden," Elena explained, her voice reverent. "The source of our family's power, and now, your power." He took another step forward, his eyes transfixed by the crystal's mesmerizing glow. Even standing at a distance, he could feel its pull, an invitation to come closer, to embrace the strength it offered. He reached out instinctively, his hand hovering inches from the surface, and felt a warmth radiating from it, seeping into his skin. It was as though the heart itself recognized him. Elena's voice cut through the trance like a lure of the crystal. The heart won't release its power easily, Dylan. You must prove yourself worthy. The heart will test you, drawing upon the doubts and fears that linger within. If you succeed, it will accept you as the true heir. If you fail. She trailed off, the unspoken consequences heavy in the air. He glanced at her, seeing the concern in her eyes, and nodded. I understand. Taking a deep breath, Dylan extended his hand and touched the crystal surface. The world shifted instantly. He was no longer in the chamber. Instead, he found himself in a vast, star-streaked void, standing on nothing but air. All around him, distant stars glimmered, illuminating the endless expanse in a pale, silvery light. He felt weightless, adrift in the cosmos. He tried to take a step, but his feet seemed to find no purchase, as if he were suspended in a dream. Suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared before him, shimmering into existence like smoke solidifying in the darkness. The figure was tall, cloaked in a darkness so deep it seemed to absorb the light around it. Its eyes, two glimmering points of crimson, fixed on him, and Dylan felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. Who are you? He asked, his voice trembling despite his efforts to remain calm. The figure's voice echoed, low and resonant, filling the void. I am the fear you carry, the doubt that festers in your heart, the shadow you cannot escape. The words struck him, echoing in the vast emptiness. He wanted to look away, but the figure's gaze held him captive, forcing him to confront the truths it embodied. He felt a surge of frustration, anger even. He had never asked for this legacy, this burden, and now it was asking him to prove himself worthy? I didn't choose this, he shouted, his voice rising with each word. I didn't ask for any of it. The shadow figure tilted its head, a cruel, knowing smile tugging at its lips. And yet here you are, drawn by power, just as all Aldens were. Power that you do not deserve, power that will destroy you. The words reverberated, awakening every insecurity, every doubt he'd ever held. He remembered his life as a repairman, the countless hours of fixing broken machinery, the obscurity and simplicity of his existence. The shadow seized upon those memories, weaving them into a tapestry of inadequacy, trying to suffocate him with the weight of his perceived insignificance. But then, through the haze of his doubts, he remembered Elena's face, her unyielding trust, the way she had looked at him as if he were the answer to the Manor's long-standing vigil. Her belief in him had not wavered, and he clung to that thought like a lifeline. No, he whispered, his voice steadying. I may have doubts, I may be afraid, but I'm not alone, and that makes me stronger than you. The shadow let out a guttural snarl, its form twisting, contorting, trying to overwhelm him. But Dylan felt a surge of strength rise within him, a power that pulsed from somewhere deep inside, a warmth that spread through his veins like liquid fire. He focused on that feeling, channeling it, letting it build until it was a roaring inferno. With a burst of determination, he pushed back against the shadow, watching as it writhed, its form beginning to dissipate. The void around him trembled, and the stars grew brighter, illuminating the darkness until it dissolved entirely. And then he was back in the chamber, his hand still resting against the heart of Alden. But something had changed. The crystal's light had shifted, becoming more vibrant, more attuned to him. He could feel its power resonating with his own, a connection that was as natural as breathing. He turned to Elena, breathless but exhilarated, his eyes wide with the thrill of the experience. She met his gaze, her expression softened by a mix of pride and relief. You passed, she said, her voice filled with quiet admiration. The heart has accepted you, Dylan. He nodded, feeling the weight of that acceptance settle upon him. The power now thrumming within him was both exhilarating and humbling. It was as if he had unlocked a part of himself he'd never known existed, a strength that was both his and something far older, an energy that linked him to generations of Aldens who had come before. But his success had come with a revelation, a profound awareness of the darkness that lingered within him. He knew now that he would need to confront those fears again, perhaps many times. Yet he also understood that he had allies, people like Elena who believed in him, who would stand by him when he needed them most. Elena took a step closer, her eyes searching his face. "How do you feel?" He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of his responsibility tempered by a newfound confidence. "It's overwhelming," he admitted. "But I feel ready. Like I finally understand why I'm here." She gave him a small, approving smile, her eyes warm. "The power within you, Dylan, it's unlike anything I've seen. But remember, it's not just raw strength. It's shaped by the choices you make, by the person you are. That's what makes you the true heir." Her words struck a chord deep within him, a reminder that this power was not just a gift but a responsibility, one that required integrity and resilience. He reached for her hand, grasping it tightly, feeling a warmth radiate from her touch that steadied him. "Thank you, Elena," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." She inclined her head, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "It's my duty, but I believe in you, Dylan. You've already proven yourself more than once." They stood in silence, the energy of the heart pulsating around them, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey they would face together. In that moment, he knew that he wasn't just bound to Alden Manor by blood, but to her, to this shared purpose that gave him strength. It was a bond that felt deeper than duty, more profound than mere alliance. And as they turned to leave the chamber, he felt the power within him solidify, a calm certainty settling over him. Whatever trials awaited, whatever shadows lurked beyond the manor's walls, he was ready to face them because for the first time, he understood the strength that lay not only within himself but in the connection he shared with Elena. The quiet of Alden Manor was shattered one night by the sudden chill that crept through the walls, a creeping darkness that spread with unnatural speed. Dylan awoke with a start, sensing a malevolent presence stirring outside the manor grounds. He bolted upright, already reaching for the weapon Elena had taught him to wield, its blade forged from the same crystal as the heart of Alden. The shadows were here drawn by the power he had awakened and ready to test his resolve. Elena was already waiting for him in the main hall, her expression grave but focused. She gripped her staff tightly, the edges of its blade gleaming with an eerie light that pulsed in sync with the heart of Alden, deep within the manor. In that moment, Dylan realized that she had been prepared for this all along, as if she had sensed the shadows approach before he ever could. "They've breached the outer wards," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "They're trying to infiltrate the heart. If they reach it, everything we've worked for will be lost." Dylan nodded, steeling himself. "Then let's make sure they don't get anywhere near it." The two of them moved through the hallways, shadows flickering against the walls as they passed the towering statues of ancient Aldens. Each step felt like a march into something far greater than himself, a battle not just for his inheritance but for everything he'd come to believe in. They reached the grand entrance hall just as the first wave of shadows began to press forward, seeping through cracks in the walls and windows like dark smoke. The creatures emerged from the darkness, taking twisted, skeletal forms, their eyes glowing with an unnatural crimson light. Their movements were fluid and predatory, each step a calculated advance that seemed designed to unnerve. Elena took her stance beside him, her gaze fierce. "Remember your training," she murmured, her voice a grounding presence amid the chaos. Dylan gripped his weapon tightly, the crystal blade thrumming in his hand. As the first shadow lunged toward him, he swung with instinct and precision, slicing through its dark form. The creature let out a piercing wail before disintegrating, its essence scattering like black mist, but more shadows followed, relentless and unyielding. They fought side by side, moving in perfect synchronization. Elena's movements were swift and calculated, her strikes precise, each swing of her staff dispatching the creatures with ruthless efficiency. Dylan found himself matching her rhythm, his instincts honed by the countless hours they had trained together. Each strike, each step, felt like an unspoken dialogue between them, an understanding that transcended words. At one point, a towering shadow broke through their defense, its claws reaching out with a speed that left no room for hesitation. Dylan was too far to stop it, his heart lurching as he realized Elena was in its path. But with a fierce cry, she swung her staff upward, meeting the creature head-on and shattering it into fragments that dissolved into the air. For a heartbeat, she turned to him, their eyes locking in the midst of the battle. In that brief moment, a wave of emotion passed between them, relief, trust, and something deeper, an unspoken promise that neither of them would fall. But the shadows were far from defeated. More poured into the hall, a seemingly endless tide, their snarls filling the air with a haunting resonance. Dylan felt exhaustion creeping in, the weight of his power beginning to drain him. Yet every time he felt his strength falter, he glanced at Elena, her figure unwavering, her presence a beacon in the darkness. "Hold your ground," she urged, her voice unwavering. "They thrive on fear. Do not let them sense it." Steeling himself, Dylan refocused, channeling his energy into the blade, allowing the power of the heart to flow through him. The weapon seemed to come alive in his hands, glowing with a fierce light that pushed back against the shadows. Together, he and Elena created a circle of defense, an unbreakable line that the shadows could not penetrate. As the battle wore on, Dylan became aware of a shift in the shadows' movements. They were hesitating, recoiling from the light, their forms beginning to waver. He could feel that his power, bolstered by Elena's presence, was driving them back. Summoning the last of his strength, he raised his blade high, allowing the energy within it to radiate outward. A blinding wave of light surged through the hall, crashing over the shadows in a powerful surge that disintegrated them on contact. One by one, the creatures fell, their forms dissipating into nothingness, until at last the hall was empty, the shadows defeated. The silence that followed was almost surreal, a stark contrast to the chaos that had filled the room just moments before. Dylan lowered his weapon, breathing heavily, his entire body aching from the exertion. He turned to Elena, who stood beside him, equally exhausted but resolute. They exchanged a look, and he could see the relief in her eyes mingled with pride. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder, grounding him in the aftermath of the battle. "You did well," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet admiration. Dylan felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of accomplishment he'd never known before. But more than that, he felt a deep gratitude for her presence, for the strength she'd lent him when he needed it most. "Couldn't have done it without you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. For a moment, they stood in silence, surrounded by the remnants of their victory. The manor felt different now, as if it too had recognized their triumph. They had defended it together against the darkness, and in doing so, had forged a bond that felt as enduring as the very walls around them. In that moment, Dylan knew that whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them together. The night was quiet, a rare and peaceful silence settling over Alden Manor after the fierce battle against the shadows. Dylan and Elena walked side by side through the vast, moonlit gardens outside the manor, letting the cool air soothe their wearied bodies. The weight of their recent victory hung between them, unspoken yet powerful, a reminder of how much they had endured together. Dylan's heart still beat heavily from the intensity of the fight, but now, beneath the thrill of survival, there was something else, a feeling that had been growing quietly, rooted in the trust, the companionship, and the fierce loyalty that had blossomed between them. He glanced at Elena, her face softened by the moonlight, her expression peaceful yet distant, as though her mind wandered to places far from this garden. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, but his concern was genuine. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and for a moment, her guarded expression melted, revealing a vulnerability that she rarely allowed herself to show. "Yes," she murmured, her voice almost a whisper, "more than all right, I think. Tonight, it reminded me of what it means to believe in something, to fight for something." He felt a surge of warmth at her words. Elena had always been so steady, so resolute, her life bound by her duty to Alden Manor and the legacy of her family. But tonight, she had fought not only for the manor, but for him, risking her own safety to protect him in the heat of battle. That realization sent a thrill through him, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond they shared, one that had deepened with every step of their journey. They continued to walk, the silence between them now filled with an unspoken tension, as though each of them sensed the weight of something just beyond words, something that both wanted to acknowledge but neither dared to voice. Finally, Dylan took a breath, gathering the courage to speak. "Elena," he began, hesitating, his voice laced with emotion. "Tonight when we fought together, I realized how much you mean to me. I don't think I could have done any of this without you. I don't think I want to." Her gaze softened, her eyes searching his with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. "Dylan," she replied, her voice steady but filled with a quiet vulnerability, "you've become more than just the heir I was meant to protect. You've become someone I trust, someone I believe in." The words hung between them, delicate and fragile, yet carrying the weight of all they had experienced together. Dylan felt his pulse quicken, his heart hammering against his chest. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers, tentative but steady. When she didn't pull away, he took her hand fully in his own, the warmth of her skin grounding him, reassuring him. "Elena," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I know we both have responsibilities, that there are things we can't ignore. But being here with you, it feels like I finally found something I didn't know I was missing." She looked down, a faint blush coloring her cheeks, though her hand remained firmly in his. "Dylan," her voice wavered, filled with a mixture of emotions, fear, hope, and something deeper. "I never allowed myself to hope for anything beyond my duty, beyond this manor. But meeting you, fighting beside you, I feel alive in a way I never have before." He felt his chest tighten, his breath catching at her confession. It was as though she had given voice to the very feelings that had been brewing within him, unspoken but undeniable. Gently, he lifted her hand, pressing it to his heart, letting her feel the rapid beat that mirrored his emotions. "Elena, I'm here because of you," he murmured, his gaze locked on hers. "Not just because of the legacy or the power. You've shown me what it means to belong, to fight for something real. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." For a long moment they stood in silence, the world around them fading into the background, leaving only the two of them under the pale light of the moon. She took a step closer, her free hand reaching up to rest on his shoulder, her eyes shining with a mixture of joy and vulnerability. "You won't lose me," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "As long as you want me by your side, Dylan, I'll be there." He felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. Slowly he leaned in, their faces inches apart, and she closed her eyes, her breath mingling with his. In that moment, everything felt right, as though the universe itself had conspired to bring them together, binding their fates inextricably. When their lips met, it was soft, a hesitant yet undeniable confirmation of the feelings they had held back for so long. The kiss was tender, filled with a gentle longing and a promise of what could be. They parted slowly, each still holding the other, their eyes meeting once more with an understanding that needed no words. In that quiet moment, they both knew that their journey had changed. They were no longer bound merely by duty or legacy, but by a love that had grown from the depths of shared trials, trust, and mutual sacrifice. And as they turned back toward Alden Manor, walking hand in hand, they knew that whatever battles awaited, whatever shadows lingered on the horizon, they would face them together, side by side, bound by a love that transcended even the stars. The first rays of dawn began to pierce the sky as Dylan and Elena stood side by side on the highest balcony of Alden Manor, overlooking the vast expanse of stars that stretched endlessly above them. The sky seemed more vast, more alive than ever before, as if the universe itself had woken in response to their union. The air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of the ancient trees surrounding the manor and the promise of a new day. For the first time, Dylan felt as if he truly understood his place in it all. Elena's hand rested gently in his, her fingers entwined with his own as they both gazed out across the distant horizon. They had spent the night talking, sharing dreams and fears, each revelation bringing them closer together. Now, in the quiet light of dawn, the weight of their shared duty felt lighter, their purpose clearer. Dylan broke the silence, his voice soft yet unwavering. "We're the last of our lines, Elena. But together, I believe we're stronger than any one Alden or guardian who came before us." She nodded, her gaze thoughtful yet steady. "Our ancestors dedicated themselves to this cause, sacrificing so much to keep the galaxy safe. But they never had what we have." Her eyes met his, a warmth in them that made his heart swell. "They never had each other. Together, we're more than a legacy. We're a new beginning." The weight of her words settled over him, grounding him in a profound realization. Their union wasn't just a partnership forged by duty, it was a bond forged by love, a force as ancient and enduring as the stars. This was more than a responsibility, it was their shared destiny, and together they could reshape it into something brighter, something lasting. Then let's make a vow, Dylan said, feeling the resolve build within him. Not just to honor the past, but to create a future worth fighting for. A future where we protect what we love, not because we have to, but because we choose to. Elena's face softened, a hint of a smile playing at her lips as she turned to him fully, her hand squeezing his. "I vow to stand by you, Dylan," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength. "To protect this galaxy, these stars, and the life within them. But more than that, I vow to stand by you wherever our path takes us. Together we'll be the light against the shadows." Her words sent a warmth through him, a feeling of purpose that went beyond mere duty. He realized then that the love they shared, the trust they had forged, was itself a kind of power, one that could illuminate even the darkest corners of the universe. They weren't alone in this fight, they had each other, and that made all the difference. Dylan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his own promise solidify within him. "I vow to protect you, Elena, and to protect everything we stand for. No matter the darkness that comes, no matter how powerful the shadows, we'll face them together. Our strength lies not just in what we can do, but in what we are to each other." They stood in silence, each absorbing the significance of their vows, the quiet power of their shared promise. The sky had fully brightened by now, casting a golden glow over the landscape, illuminating the manor's ancient stone walls, as if even the building itself bore witness to their commitment. In that moment they felt as if time itself had paused, honoring their pledge. Then, as if on cue, a faint hum began to resonate from deep within the manor. It was the heart of Alden, pulsing in sync with their combined energy, a living testament to their oath. The crystal's light cast a soft glow that washed over them, enveloping them in its warmth, amplifying the bond they had formed. The heart seemed to recognize them, not just as individuals but as a united force, its energy flowing through them, connecting them to the power of Alden's legacy. Elena's eyes shone with quiet awe as she looked at Dylan. "The heart of Alden recognizes our vow. It's as if it, too, has waited for this moment." Dylan felt a profound connection with the crystal, sensing that its power was no longer a solitary gift, but something they shared, something strengthened by their union. He could feel the energy course through him, steady and strong, resonating with Elena's presence by his side. In that moment, he realized the true nature of their inheritance. It wasn't just a power to wield in times of darkness, it was a force meant to be shared, a gift that grew stronger through trust, unity, and love. This was the legacy of Alden, one that he and Elena would carry forward, transforming it into a new chapter of hope and resilience. They turned toward each other, hands still clasped, their gazes locked. There was no need for further words, their commitment was woven into the very fabric of the moment, a promise sealed in silence yet powerful enough to echo across the stars. After a few breaths, Elena broke the stillness, a soft determination in her voice. "There will be others like us, Dylan. Others who will need guidance, strength, hope. We can offer them that." Dylan nodded, understanding her vision completely. They were not just protectors of Alden Manor, they were protectors of all those who sought a life free from the shadows. They would be a beacon for others, a force that inspired as much as it protected. "Then let's begin," he said, feeling the finality of the moment, the promise set firmly in his heart. "Let's be what the galaxy needs, together." They stood on the balcony a little longer, watching as the first star faded against the lightening sky, knowing that wherever the shadows lurked, they would be there to counter them. Their vow was more than words, it was a promise forged in love, a bond unbreakable, and a light powerful enough to challenge even the darkest of forces. And as they turned back into Alden Manor, the dawn breaking behind them, Dylan and Elena walked forward, ready to face whatever the future held together, as protectors, as partners, and as the last heirs of a legacy they would now make their own.